in this series. This is how to get more out of your Aria cloud management products and services. So the GMU program is a program that we're going to be running every other week from here on out. We're going to be running anywhere from half-hour to 90-minute sessions talking about technical content with some of our top technical voices in the world of VMware cloud management. And we're really lucky that these sessions are basically free. You jump on in with your social account, you log in, and you get direct time with some of our technical experts. So these are going to be running, like I said, every other week. This week, we've got how to build custom dashboards with our friend Tim George. And in 2 weeks, we're going to be bringing creating self-service multi-cloud with our friend Vincent Riccio. So keep an eye out for that. We're going to be promoting all of these sessions across the social channels and blogs, as well as keeping an archive of previous sessions on our VMware Tech Zone. So keep an eye out for those. So again, thanks for everybody for joining today, and we're going to get rolling. Tim, it's all you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Anders. And I will show. I've got at the end here where I'm going to show some of those links you mentioned to Tech Zone and to our YouTube channel, and specifically a playlist that kind of goes more into some dashboards. So I'll show those links at the end as well. We'll kind of leave those up a while so everybody can copy those down. Well, thanks everyone for joining again. I am Tim George. I'm a technical marketing manager here at VMware. Today we're going through how to build some custom dashboards in VMware Aria Operations, formerly vRealize Operations. So now it is VMware Aria Operations. So today, again, we're talking about custom dashboards and what we can build with custom dashboards, right? There's a number of any number of different things we can do with those, right? If we want to build inventory dashboards, application topology dashboards, if we want to do things for troubleshooting, for infrastructure management, anything we want to look to kind of create, we can create. Sky's the limit here. The only limit is our imagination on what we want to build. So what we're going to cover then a little bit today, and this will be, I'm going to try not to get too far in depth on some of these because we can customize a lot of things in Aria Operations. So we're going to cover some of the basics. We're going to cover on some of the most popular widgets we use for custom dashboards, the configurations that go along with those, some of the options we have for those widgets, the interactions we have between widgets, the depth of relationships, and then the driver for our dashboard. And we'll get into what that means a little bit further in. So let me go ahead and jump in. What we want to do when we're creating any sort of dashboards, first thing we come to our Visualize tab that's right here, and then we can go and create our specific dashboards. I mentioned we have a driver that we have or want for each individual dashboard, and that's something that is going to kind of drive the rest of our dashboard. It's going to be the focus or the catalyst for all the dashboards. So I like to use an object list, but this is very subjective, much like the dashboards you can build. Everything is very subjective when it comes to these dashboards. Let me make that little click out of this real quick. There we go. So I like to use these object lists. And what that's going to do is allow us to choose the objects that we want to use. And we'll go through each of these widgets. There are, I think, something like 43 or 44 different widgets that we can choose. So there are a number of things. As again, we've mentioned, our imagination is kind of the only limit as far as what we want to, what we can build. So I'm going to first go through and we'll look at some of the most popular ones and how those configuration works for some of those most popular widgets here. First one being that object list. Now we're going to create a dashboard today that maybe is something that maybe not everybody would create because it is just a little bit to show off the widgets themselves and how they interact with each other, but not necessarily something I would build if I was going to be actually monitoring my environment, but again, just kind of showing off a little bit. So our object list, and in this case, I think I'm going to have our first object list, and we need to decide how we want this dashboard to start. In this case, I want to start with I'm going to start with our clusters, and we can edit our widget. We're just using a little pencil here, and we get our first configuration options on how we're going to edit this particular widget. And again, this is going to be our driver. This is what we want to be the catalyst for the rest of the dashboard. So I'm going to choose here on self-provider and turn self-provider on. This is probably the only widget that we're going to have that is going to be a self-provider. This is where everything starts. So it's going to be in the upper left corner, so that we can choose our objects from this list, and it will drive everything else. I'm going to select our first row, so it's auto going to select, or we're going to auto select our first row. We could go ahead and refresh our content every so often if we wanted to do that, but for the most part, unless we have very short-lived objects, we can leave that off for the moment and just say it's going to refresh based on if anything changes in our operations in general. So that's it for our configuration. Pretty simple on configuration of the overall widget. Then we go to our input data. And this is where we're going to decide, do we want to choose all objects, all of our clusters, since that's what this widget is going to be, or do we want to specify individual objects? In this case, we've already decided, or I've already decided, we're going to choose clusters. But if I wanted to choose specific objects, we could come in here and say, I just want to do maybe this virtual machine, and I could pick a subnet on AWS if I wanted. I'm just picking kind of random things here just to show how this would work. And if we just choose just those 3 objects and I hit save, we're going to have just those 3 objects. And those are the only 3 objects we'll ever have to choose from in this particular dashboard. So that's a way we can specify exactly very specific objects. Or if we go back in, we're going to choose and say, I actually want all objects of the type I'm going to select. So I'm going to change it back to all and move to our output filter. Now there's a bunch of options here as well. We can move into individual objects this way. Down below, we can see everything that's listed, our AWS world, our Azure world. We could look at Cisco UCS, but I like to use object type because in this case, we're pulling in all of our objects. And so I want to pick, in this case, again, we're picking our cluster. So I'm going to scroll down, find cluster compute resource, and that's what we're going to use to drive everything. If I can find it, there we go. All right, so now we've chosen. We've got all of our clusters that are available here. We could have also picked any data centers. We could have started at hosts. We could have started at virtual machines. And in this case, I usually like to, again, very subjective, but I like to pick something more general and then go granular or more granular as we sort of dive down further. So in the first case here, we're going to use clusters. We have all 4 that are there. Now, if we just wanted to look at, what is under each of these clusters, we can do a couple different objects, or a couple different options, I should say. We can choose another object list here below. In this case, maybe I want these objects I want to put as all of the hosts that are in this cluster. So we're back at the configuration. It's the same object or same widget, the object list. But in this case, I'm not going to click that self-provider because this is not going to be coming from itself. The data is not coming from itself. I'm going to tell it that I want only the hosts that are under the cluster we've chosen. And so once we've done that, since we're not having self-provider, if I turn self-provider, we'll notice input transformation kind of disappears, and we get input data. If I turn that to off, input data disappears. Now we have input transformation. And so instead of what we were looking at before, the input data, where we can select all objects or select just the objects we want, we're going to tell it in this case that I want the children of the cluster. We have to kind of know our parent-child relationships a little bit here. So I've kind of brought up a dashboard that kind of helps with that. We have data center to cluster to host to virtual machine to data store, and this is just showing briefly how those relationships work. If we had any, if we went up further, we'd have our data center or potentially vSphere world up above. But in this case, we're starting with our cluster. So we're starting here, and I want to go down to our host. So that is a child of the cluster. And we're going to go output filter just like we did before. We're going to pick on object types as soon as it opens up for us. And we're going to find host system here. Scroll down to the H's. There we go, host system. All right, so now I've told this object list that I want all of the hosts, but right now it's bringing in literally all of the hosts. So we can see we've got 150 hosts that we've got pulled in, and it's not really listing the hosts in individual clusters. And notice if we change our cluster, our driver here at the top, we're not getting any sort of change on our host system. So what we need to do is go up here to show interactions, and we're going to tell it this is our cluster at the top. We're going to tell it we want the children, which we've already specified, of that cluster, which is going to be the host. Now here's a kind of a general best practice when making these custom dashboards. You always want to make sure that in your driver or your driving widget that you have at least two objects there. The reason being, as we just changed our interaction, the only way to get this to kind of flash and change to the actual objects we want, we actually have to select something different than what we were on before. So you always want to make sure you have two, so you can switch back and forth at least between two of these, so that we can flash to just the ones that the one we want. We'll get the host that we want below it. So if I click on our north cluster here, now we can see all of the hosts that are part of that cluster. So now we could also do, let's use our heat map as an example here. It's another popular widget. We could have used a heat map for the driver of the dashboard as well, and we'll kind of look into that in a moment here. But if I want to also see maybe not just the hosts that are part of this cluster, but maybe I want to see if they're healthy, or if specific metrics on those individual ones. So this is a question I get a lot from folks, that how to configure these heat map widgets, because sometimes they can be a little tricky if you don't know what you're looking for. So under input transformation, I'm going to change that again to children, because I'm going to make this heat map. And let's just change it here so we know. I'm going to name it so we know if this is the host heat map. I'm going to change it again because we're going to have this come off of our cluster widget, and we're going to change that. We want it to be the host, though. Under output data, here's where the part gets sometimes a little bit tricky when it comes to how we're going to group these, how we're going to size these or color these heat maps. So I'm just going to call it host. We just need a name for that. And it will save this configuration as soon as we've saved it, so that we could use it at a later time if we wanted to use it on a different dashboard as well. In this case, we're picking our hosts, and we want it to be all of our hosts that are under that cluster. So I'm going to group it here by our cluster compute resource. Our clusters is how it's going to be grouped by. So these we could further group it if we wanted to group it further by data center or something like that. But in this case, since we're really interested in the hosts themselves underneath that cluster, we're just going to leave that blank at the moment. Now, the actual object type is where we're going to choose. Like we said, we're going to pick our host system as what we want to see here. And then we're going to size these. We can pick any metric we want. We could pick just badge, and we could say, I want to size it by health, or maybe size it by risk or workload. We could pick in any sort of individual metric, like let's just say CPU. Let's go with usage, I think. Demand will work. Let's size these by CPU demand. So now the bigger that our individual squares or rectangles is going to determine how, or when we're looking at it, that'll be how big the demand percentage is. You want to color this. Let's color it by something different. Let's color by maybe memory usage instead here. I'm going to try to keep these metrics a little simple just for that purpose. So now if we save it as is, we know we're grouping by by cluster, and we've got all of our hosts underneath it. And again, we've run into the same thing that I was talking about earlier, where we want to make sure that we have at least two objects in our driving cluster or driving widget, because I need to switch it, and now it should. Whoops, actually, I need to connect it. That's always important. So go into interactions, and I'm just clicking on the arrow here, and I'm dragging over to, I guess it kind of looks like a bullseye, a target. And then now let me switch it again. Now I should get that the proper way to do so. So now we've gotten our 3 hosts. We know there's 3 there, and we can see our 3 hosts on our heat map. So we've got that there. Now at the bottom, though, you can see our green is at the lowest, and our red is at the highest. Or we know we're only going at this point from 22.64, and then we're talking on color here. 22.64%, and our top is at 44%. Now that's just set up on a gradient at the moment, going from green to red. We could always go back in and change that if we wanted. We can change our colors. Let me go back to output data here. So if I wanted to have this go from green through orange to red, or through yellow to red, we can certainly do that and keep our gradient. Or we can switch and go to solid coloring as well, where I can do the same thing. I'm just clicking on that, and I want to have say yellow, so maybe from 0 to 40. Or again, we're on memory usage, so 0 to 50 is green, and then I want red to start at maybe 90. And if I wanted, I can click and say, all right, I want there to be an orange as well, and that'll be at say 75, something like that. And I'm going to change this so that rather than as before, where we had between 22 and 44, we're just going to make that between 0 and 100. So it knows what the minimum and the maximum are. And if we save that, now we've got our solid colors that we're choosing from. Looks like most of our hosts here are fairly healthy. That one had yellow as far as memory. So we can see what we've done, and we've changed that a little bit here. Now we can also, if we wanted to look further into these, right now we're sized by a CPU demand. So it looks like for the most part, depending on the cluster we're in, most of these are pretty equal, but as far as size is concerned. But if we wanted to check in and see based on our colors and find some of that information, or find some further information about our particular hosts, we can use our next widget that I want to talk about, which is the Scoreboard widget. So that's this one here, another very popular one because it has a lot of options we can use, or a lot of options to visualize our data, and a lot of ways we can customize that. So I'm going to move that up. We'll use the Scoreboard as the next thing to discuss. First thing I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and hook it up. It's sometimes a little easier to make sure that you've already got it hooked, because I'm going to have it come from our hosts. So each host I'm clicking on is then going to go over and show to our Scoreboard what we want to look at. So now if I change our host again, now we can see we've got our Scoreboard populated, and it does auto-populate with some metrics here. We can see that this particular host is on PowerEdge R640. We can see our power management settings, or some memory usage there again. So it does have some information that is here that we can use to determine some things. If we want to customize a little further, we can always jump in and see what our configuration options look like for the Scoreboard widget here. And let's jump in and look at that. So we have configuration, and before the only options we really had was on that list widget was self-provider and auto-select the first row. Since this isn't a list, we don't need to auto-select anything. We don't need to select anything at all if we didn't want to. But we still we have that self-provider option. In this case, again, we are going to have our information, or the things that are going to populate, come from our host list widget. So we don't need to make this a self-provider unless we wanted to make it a static widget. We can choose to round our decimals up or down, depending on how granular we want to get there. We can choose our box columns, which is going to be how many columns across is this particular widget going to be. So if I move it up to something like 4, Let's just click and save that so we can see we're saving or we're rounding off to 3, and we made it 4 across. So we've got 4 there. That's a little difficult to read. Of course, we could always extend out. We can resize any of these widgets by clicking and dragging on the bottom right corner, and we can resize that. So we can see a little bit more if we wanted to have this many, potentially this many metrics all at one time. We can certainly do that. I usually try to keep that a little smaller. I'm going to move it back down to what it was. And instead of 4 across, again, that's a little difficult to read. Let's just change it to something that's maybe a little easier. Let's go to 3. And we also have options then to change how that looks, or how that widget looks. Right now it's set to our theme as default. And we can see there's a number of different options we can choose. There's original, there's a preview what it'll look like, solid colors. We can choose pastel or high contrast. And I also like to add in what we're showing. Right now we're just the metric name and the unit, but if we change, we can see a spark line. Now we can see a little bit about whatever that metric we're looking at, what it's actually been doing over the last, whatever the amount we want it to be. We can set that period length, whether it be to dashboard time. We can set it just so it's always within the last hour, whatever we like it to be. I'm going to set it for dashboard time now, just so that everything is more consistent when we actually finish a dashboard here. Now we'll notice as well underneath this period length that we've got, it says show DT, and that's going to be our dynamic threshold. Now with the high contrast visual theme, or the theme of high contrast, we can't add that dynamic threshold there. So I'm just going to choose something that's a little different, like the pastel. Now we can go ahead and show our dynamic threshold. That of course is the threshold that Aria Operations is determining. It's constantly learning what is the normal behavior for a specific metric, and saying here that it's usually within this range, and we'll set that dynamic threshold. So the longer we have that going, the better it's going to be for determining that dynamic threshold. I'm going to leave that at pastel, and add our threshold in there, add a sparkling in there, and now let's save it again and see what that looks like. And now we've gotten, we changed it down to 3 as well. So now we have certain metrics. We can see that there are that dynamic threshold, that gray color behind our spark lines. We've changed the way that those look, and we can see it's a little bit more readable. We could always put it down to 2 or expand our widget if we wanted to do that to make it easier to read there as well. Now, if we didn't want to have these kind of pre-populated or auto-populated metrics within that, we can change that as well and get more of the metrics that we actually want to see here. So let's jump back in, because so far we've only looked at the configuration of the scoreboard, and it's auto-populating everything else, but we have the option. We wanted to leave it itself. We could change that though if we wanted to change it to click on a host and we see the virtual machine metrics. We could change that to the child of the host, but I'm going to leave that here for now, so that when we click on a host, we're going to see metrics for that particular host. And if I click on output data, this is where we're going to be able to change those metrics that we're looking at. I'm going to add the plus sign, and then we need to choose our adapter type, which is in this case our vCenter adapter. And we're getting information from our host system. So we're just going to type host there. And then all of the options we want to look at will pop up on the right. So we can use any supermetrics we wanted to as well. So if we've created any supermetrics for any of our individual objects or object types, we can use those supermetrics. Let's just pick a couple here. Let's go back to CPU, since that's what we're looking at before. Let's go with usage, and we'll kind of come back here to the this chart where we can see all of the metrics together. But if I click the plus sign, it will go right back where we were. So we don't have to do that adapter type and the object type every single time. It'll go right back to where we were. So we could also go ahead and add, let's maybe add in demand percent. How about demand in megahertz as well? And then since we're using memory as our other, the other thing we were using in our heat map, maybe let's add memory usage in here as well, just so we can see that all together all in one time. Let me add a couple more just so we can see what those look like once we've gotten a number there. All right, here we go. All right, so now let's save that off. And now instead of those pre-populated, we now have just those 6 we just picked. Now, it does, however, look a little odd because we see usage and usage, demand, but that's all we're really getting there. But we can see what those numbers are. So we know this is looks like a percent. We know this is megahertz. We've got our total capacity in kilobytes, but I like to change those around a little bit. So if we go back into our configuration here, we can go back to output data where we were. And now we can add this box label here. And in this case, we know this is CPU usage percent, and we can click update. This was CPU demand. So we can change these under box label if we wanted to get something that's a little easier to read. But what we can also do in this particular spot is we can change to our colors or our units. Right now, I'm going to leave the units as auto. It usually is pretty good about determining what that might be. But we can also change the color. And right now, it's set up to kind of auto detect what that is. But if I wanted to change that, I can go to custom insteat of symptom as the color method, and then I can now set my own colors, just like we did in the heat map. Now I can change that, so I can change whatever I'd like it to be. Let's say 50 and 60 and 80 here. And if we update that, it will update that. And now any of those, anything that we've had in the scoreboard, we're still underneath those colors we just changed. But if it reaches the colors, we were close on CPU usage. I think we set it for 50. So if it goes up 3% more, we're going to change that. That'll be yellow, be under the yellow bound as well from that point. And that'll be regardless of the host we change, that widget will then always show anything that is abnormal or that reaches above our threshold for that particular object. Next thing I want to talk about. Let me make this so I didn't click there. Let's raise this back up. Next thing to talk about is the health chart. And I see this customers use this quite a bit as far as to look at just overall health. It kind of gives you at a glance how healthy is something doing. So I'm going to move our health chart over, and let's go ahead and configure that as well. So at the moment, I think let's just have this be all of our children of that cluster, since that's again what we're kind of starting with. That's again our driver, that cluster. So we can make that cluster sort of again the driver and maybe the focus of this dashboard. Maybe it's a kind of a cluster overview dashboard that we're working on. So our health chart, again, we get our same options. We're refreshing our content. Is this going to be a self-provider? We can then also change to how we're ordering these because it's going to be a number of objects that will be included in this widget. We can go from ascending or descending, whatever we like to be. If we want to have those medium or if we want to change those small, and we'll see what each of these look like when we go back to it as well. And now this again is a health chart, and it's going to show us then, in this case, we're going to tell it to give us all of the children of our cluster. So we're going to have to connect up or set our interactions for this as well when we get to it. But in this case, I'm going to change this here, our relationship. I'm going to change that to children. Now let's go ahead and hit save real quick. And let's link this up. Again, we have to make sure that we're always connecting things through our interactions, so we know what we want our widgets to do. And let's choose a cluster real quick here. And now we'll see everything that is a child of that cluster is going to be shown here in this health chart. Now, there's quite a few things here. It looks like 14 different children of that particular cluster. So now if we go back in, this again is where I was saying we have a small, medium, and large. If I want to make that a little easier to read, I'm going to choose that small. Let's see what that looks like. A little bit. We can fit a few more objects on screen at this point. Make it a little less scrolling. And again, this is just, if we're just making this a cluster overview dashboard, it just gives us at a glance, a place we can start from to say, okay, we know these particular hosts are maybe having some health challenges. They're the same host we're looking at over here in our heat map, and the same host that we're looking at one at a time in our scoreboard. But in our heat map, we're just looking at, it's still looking at green, or it's still looking green in this case, because we're coloring by memory usage, and that memory usage doesn't appear to be affecting health. So there's something else that's affecting health on these hosts, and it doesn't appear to be memory usage in this case. Otherwise, these would be a darker color, or yellow, orange, or red. Now we are using this, and just before I move to the next widget, I guess I should mention before on this health chart as well, we've got it set, or the configuration set for health. We could also do it for risk. We could do that for any efficiency, if there's anything we could do to make these hosts run more efficient, or we can do any sort of a custom kind of metric. So we can choose a metric we want. Same thing we did before. We're going to choose our vCenter adapter. We're going to choose a host, or we could choose whatever it is we want to make that custom metric. And then again, we can change our ranges just like we could before in our unit. And if we wanted to do labels or names, anything we wanted to change on that particular widget. Now, before we move on, right now we have it set for, we're selecting a cluster. And what I like to do when I'm making these dashboards is we'll come here and say, select a cluster, because we want to know what we're doing. We might know because we're the ones that have made these dashboards, but someone who hasn't used them before might not know what they need to do. So I kind of we need to select a cluster first. In this case, I want to, these are going to be the hosts. So let's just say hosts in selected cluster. And this also just helps a little bit if you name these now, just kind of a best practice. If we show our interactions, now we can see what we're looking at. Here's our clusters. Here's the host in the cluster. We've got a scoreboard. What we could probably do is change that and put that into or change that to host scoreboard, so we know what that scoreboard is for. In this case, we're not really we don't have a whole lot of widgets here, so it's not too bad as far as getting confused on what each widget is showing. But the bigger dashboards, or the more complex dashboards you build, that's going to be a little more confusing if you don't label these a little better. So from there, we can also, on top of driving from our kind of our focus widget, which is again our clusters. And at the moment, if we choose, let's just pick one of these, that one will work. Any of our hosts that pop into our list widget down here, if I choose those, we know it's going to change the scoreboard because we've set the interactions. We've set that to pull in the individual metrics we wanted to see. Now we could also then, if we say, wait a second, well, I want to look at that particular host. We know that this heat map is pulling all the hosts in the cluster, same as this list widget is. This just gives us a little more visual representation of how that host might be performing. But we could also, if we wanted to look at individual metrics for this host coming from heat map, well, that's something we can do within this interaction, or the interactions for this dashboard. So we've got our heat map, and we've got our scoreboard. What I can also do is click and do this as well. So I'm going to drag a link down from our heat map down to our scoreboard. And now I can use either widget, whether that be, let me make this a little smaller first. Whether that be our list widget. Of course, we already looked at our list widget is going to change our scoreboard. But now if we, for example, one of these was turning bright red on us, we could also click our heat map. And this scoreboard will also change based on that as well. So now we've decided that there's two different ways, or two different methods we can get our host or our scoreboard to show up. All right, next widget. The next thing I want to discuss is just this top N widget, another important widget I see people use a lot. And so in some cases, I've seen dashboards that are made entirely of top N widgets. So I'm going to drag this up here and we'll look at what that top N widget will do. All right. Let's first of all, let's hook it up. And I think I'm going to have it come from our hosts here. Let's make sure we've got that all of our data from there is going over to our top N. All right. So now what do we want to see in this particular widget? And we again get to configuration. Same kind of things we were looking at before. So provider, refresh content. We get rounding our decimals with how many our bar count is actually going to be how many objects are displayed there. And then we can go and say, all right, I want just top least healthy or top most healthy, depending on what we want to look for, top most volatile, whatever object it is we decide we're going to put into this particular widget. Or we can again go with a metric analysis as well. So we can have top highest utilization. Let's leave it at top highest, or top abnormal. Let's leave it at top highest utilization at the moment. I think let's change this. Let's look at the VMs that are underneath or that are running on this host. So let's just change that. We don't need to make at this point any other widget that says which virtual machine we're looking at. We're just going to choose all the virtual machines running on a particular the host, whatever host we've collected. And I'm going to select a metric. Let's again just go by, we've kind of been using CPU or memory for most part here. And we can choose our color method. If we want to change that again, we can change our colors, we can change our units, the labels we're looking at. So we can just change this to CPU usage %. And let's save that off and see what that looks like. So now if I, again, let's start at the beginning here. We're going to select a cluster, which is going to make everything kind of flash for us. And we've already set on this particular host widget. We wanted to auto select the first line. So it switched our scoreboard here. Our heat map changed according to our cluster. Our health chart changed according to the cluster we've selected. And now, depending on the host we've selected here in this other widget, we also then get information here that goes through the virtual machines that are running on that host. And we don't really know what all of those are yet because we haven't set anything up specifically for that, but we can see there are a few virtual machines we've set up on that host. We can see the CPU usage %. We've set that as our label, and now we've got that listed in order, and we've set it for 10s. We're looking at our top 10 virtual machines on that particular host in order of CPU usage. And we could change that to least CPU usage, or whatever metric we wanted to change that. We could also change as well. So if we wanted to look at that, those virtual machines that are there, of course, we could also do that. We could add another object list down here, and just like we did before, we can change it. I want to say I want to get maybe all the virtual machines on this particular host. So I'm going to change that to children. And I'm just going to kind of move through this really quickly here just so we can show that what that would look like. We can see those virtual machines that are coming out of here. So I'm going to scroll all the way down, find virtual machines. All right, there we go, virtual machines. And we set it as children because the host is the parent of the virtual machines. And again, we're seeing 2,782. Well, I'm fairly certain that host system is not running all 2,000 virtual machines, which means we've forgotten to say, I want only virtual machines that are children of the host system that we've identified. And so now we see we've got our top 10 over there as far as our virtual machines, and we can see the list of our virtual machines. And now if we change our cluster again, as the host changes, it changes all the other widgets. It changes our top N widget. It now then changes our virtual machine widgets. We can see the 40 virtual machines that are there on that particular host. Now, a bit on before I move on further, a bit on columns and how that's working right now. All of our widgets are basically showing the adapter type, the object type, the policy, the collection state, and the status. Now we've gotten the for at least the top two list widgets here. Whoops. We know we're saying select a cluster, so we know what that object type is. The cluster and the hosts are coming in from vCenter adapters. We probably don't need to have that information there. So we can click on this little spot in the bottom left there. I don't, unless we're specifically looking for the state and status of our objects, we can turn those, unselect those. We can turn those off. I probably don't need the policy. Again, we're setting what the object type is in the title of the widget, and I'm going to turn off the adapter type as well. Most things are coming from the vCenter adapter. So now we've got just the names here, and that's all we're getting at the moment. It cleaned it up a little bit so it's a little easier to read, but now that widget is probably too big for what it needs to be. We can either make it smaller just so we see just the names there, or we could also add in individual metrics into this particular widget, meaning we don't need to create a new widget to show some information or some metrics on this particular object. We can click this additional columns down at the bottom that we haven't talked about until now, but we can now bring up the same thing we're doing since this is in the cluster widget or cluster object list widget. Let's choose the same thing. The cluster is here, and now if we wanted, we can choose again our supermetrics. We can choose any sort of properties. So if we wanted to look at configuration or any of the summary metrics that are or properties that are with this with the clusters, we can choose anything we wanted there. Or let's go into here. Performance, I think is KPIs. Let's look at summary dashboards. All right, let's see. Maybe I want the average running VM count per cluster, and we can really kind of pick anything. How about throughput? Throughput will work. So now when I click save on that, now we can see that all of our cluster information next to it. We've got the average running VMs. We've got our total throughput, and so we've got additional columns. Without adding another widget, we can start to look at some of those metrics just here within our list widget. So it kind of helps out if we didn't want our dashboard overall to get too crowded. We can just do that directly there. Let's go ahead and let me clear some of this stuff up here. Let's delete some of these just so we can have a little better, a little more space. The next set of widgets is really just going into just a few easy ones that are easy to look at, easy to configure. Capacity widgets. So that's looking at capacity remaining and time remaining. And these ones are really quite easy to set up. We're just going to drag them in there so we know we've got capacity remaining, time remaining. If I go to show interactions, this is from our host widget. I'm just going to click and drag each one over there. And now if we select one, we've seen our capacity remaining. We see our time remaining for each cluster or each host. As we click a host, it will change. Now, one thing one point this brings up, though, if we're looking at this particular host, and I can see it's showing here that we've got 84 deployed virtual machines, and we've got 63 that are powered on. And we've got this bottom list widget set up to show all of those virtual machines that are part of that host. We can see we've got the 84. So we're getting all of the deployed virtual machines, whether it's powered on or whether it's not powered on or powered off, either way, we're getting all of those. And we could leave it that way and just leave it at all deployed virtual machines, whether they're on or off, or we could change that and make that so we're getting only the powered on ones. So what I want to do is go to this output filter, and this is another part of these widgets we haven't discussed until now, but originally we chose our basic filter, which is how we got to virtual machines. We chose virtual machines in our list all the way at the bottom, but there is another tab here, and that's the advanced tab. And the advanced is going to allow us to specify a set of criteria or multiple sets of criteria for how we want to filter this down a little bit more. So in this case, since we want to only see our virtual machines that are powered on, I'm going to type virtual machine here, and then we can go to properties, and I want to choose a property. I want this to be, I believe that if I remember, it's summary and runtime and power state. There we go. And I want the power state to be only powered on. So now let's save that back off. We already had it set for virtual machines. Now we're set down to, we see there's a total down at the bottom in this little bottom part. We see there are 63 items now, which matches our powered on that we're showing there. Just by chance happen to see we've got powered on 63, so we've matched. We've used that filter to then kind of show that as well. So one last thing just to show, and then we'll open it up and see if there's any sort of questions that might have popped up. Another thing that's pretty easy to set up, pretty easy to do, is using these metric pickers here. In a metric picker, we can also use a metric chart if we want to look into it. What we can do then is I'm going to go back into interactions. I'm going to drag this over here because I want my VM, in this case, our virtual machine, to then power our metric picker widget. It'll give me the correct set of metrics that I want to use. And it's something we haven't really looked at yet, but we do have options here. That there's blue circles and there's little yellow circles. Blue circles are basically we're connecting them. We're saying there's a relationship between these widget or these two widgets. One is going to drive or power the next. And if I want actual individual metrics to go somewhere, that's when I'm going to use these yellow. And this yellow circle, then I'm going to click and drag from the metric picker. I'm going to say I want a metric from this widget. I want it to come over to this widget, the individual metrics themselves. So now, if I choose any of our virtual machines here, we're going to see our metrics. If we choose any metric, whichever one we want to choose here, now we'll come over here, that individual metric, come over to our metric chart where we can look at it further. So we can then from here, of course, we can do any sort of metric correlation we want. So it's a very powerful chart as far, or widget. We can then look at how our CPU demand, that's what I happen to click on, but how it correlates with our workload, our demand in megahertz. I would imagine our percentage in megahertz would be around the same. But we can correlate that with then itself or with its peers or other virtual machines that might be having the same sort of challenges, or if we're running into any sort of challenges. So that's the metric chart. It's the same or a little bit different. It would be, there is a, if I can find it here, there's a rolling view chart. Let's close this one out. And a rolling view chart just allows us to add more metrics that we can switch between, gives us a rolling view of that particular metric, whatever we're looking at. Just to show it real quick, let's choose the same thing. And we can also say, I want it in megahertz instead of percentage. And now we can switch between the two as well, both at the bottom here on this particular widget. Just for a couple other easy ones that are there, the alert lists or top alerts are very easy to set up. Let's just drag one in just to show it how that works. From there, if I just go back in interactions, make sure it's hooked up. Let's just say it's from the VM. And now I need the VM. That's all I have to do. There's no configuration I need to do there. It's going to give me the top alerts on that particular virtual machine. Same thing with the alert list. Nothing I really have to do other than change interactions, and it will pull information directly in there. The other another one that's fairly simple is the advanced relationship widget. The only thing we need to do here, I'm going to make this a little bigger. Sometimes it's a little bit can be a little bit difficult to see it, and so we make this widget a little bigger. Again, that's just by clicking and dragging on the bottom right. And let's show interactions here. So how about from the VM as well? Let's do that. And now from the object list, if I choose that, it will now then show me the relationship for that particular virtual machine. Right now, it's just going kind of up one hop and down one hop. Remember, we talked about a little bit about the parent-child relationships. This is where our depth is going to come into play. We can choose a depth of 3 on each. That means going to the left and to the right. And now we can see we pulled in not just the data store, but the disk groups and the individual disks on our vSAN. We can also then see, okay, it's looks like it's connected to a ServiceNow team, or it's actually unassigned with ServiceNow team. We see our cluster, and further we move up, we see our individual clusters and the vCenters, or the vCenter that it's also associated with. So, pretty simple one to do there. So I think that's I know we're running out of time. This is only an hour session, so we're getting to closer to 4 o'clock. Or 4 o'clock Eastern time, I should say. So let's jump back into slides real quick. Here's what we should have learned. Hopefully, we've learned those things. What is the driver of our dashboard? How that depth works? A few of the most popular interactions in configurations and widgets, and all the options that come along with that. Now, for the next session, I just want to bring out that Vincent, I know Andrews mentioned at the very beginning, or the very beginning of this, that Vincent is going to go through and tell us how to create a self-service multi-cloud. That is going to be on the 13th, also at 12 o'clock Pacific. The last slide I'm going to leave up here, it has that information that Andrews was also talking about at the beginning, that goes through that YouTube link. Is, I know it's not the easiest to read or anything there, but that goes to that playlist I was mentioning before, which is Dashboards Made Easy. So that's directly to that playlist. Of course, you can always check out blogs.vmware.com for any information there. And then I put the last link I put is to TechZone, and TechZone is a great spot for kind of learning information about various products within the Aria name or the Aria family. Again, this was or used to be formerly the vRealize family. So now we've got Aria Operations for logs, so on and so forth. So that has great information there on TechZone as well. So I'll open, Brandon, were there any good questions maybe that we should go over, or anything that came in comment-wise that we wanted to go over? Maybe someone could add Brandon in real quick just so we could so he can speak, I guess. All right, I think you're live there, Brandon. Anything good we wanted to needed to go over that wasn't answered?
Was asking for a recording, which you got a link up here on the page. So I think we got that one.
Okay, great. No other questions were there?
I got the other one that came in.
Okay.
Already answered that one, so I think we're good. Okay,
great. Well, that concludes my portion of the moment. We'll stick around for a couple minutes here. If anyone does have any questions other than that, I'll leave this slide up so we can copy, take a screenshot, or take a picture, whatever it might be for that TechZone and the YouTube links. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. I hope we went through. I know there was a fairly quick whirlwind tour, but hopefully that we learned some things from today. But thanks everyone for joining, and hope you join us for Vincent's session on the 13th as well.